is there anything in what John's just described to us, of course, and as John has said, he didn't go anywhere near the mining bit, but that's totally fine, John, because actually learning from this massive part of history, what can we learn with regards to trust is huge. I don't know, Richard, if you've got anything that you'd like to reflect on, either with regards to what John's just said or what you've heard through this afternoon, and then maybe if I go to Johannes.
Well, I mean, that was really great. Having seen the Troubles from 1969 when I was the age of 10, how it all has gone on and kind of healed itself. I think what's really interesting, I think it shows that you can't go to depths too deep to pull back from. So, it's quite clear that how you can't go any deeper than really wanting to kill the people that you live next door to. But people have come back from that. So what I would say is you can rebuild trust even when it's completely broken. And it's the thing I learned from it is getting the people actually involved. The politicians are important because but actually it's got to come from the groundswell. And I think, as you said, it's perhaps the women in Northern Ireland who were sick and tired of their husbands, brothers, sons, and whatever being shooting one another, and that was also important. So it's kind of empowering a part of the community that perhaps didn't have a voice to help turn that. And I think that's what we're going to see perhaps in the problems that's happening in Ukraine and Russia. It's when there's a part of the community that doesn't have a voice currently who suddenly finds a voice that are then able to kind of do that. But that's, I think, big learning for me is when I saw what happened in Northern Ireland, you realise you can turn back from something, even however dark it is, you can bring it, you can get trust out of suspicion. And I think that's the biggest lesson for me.
Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Johannes, how about yourself? And then if John wants to comment on any of it, feel free to chip in, John.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks, Richard, for that takeaway. I think that's a valuable takeaway indeed, that it doesn't matter how bad things get. Here's an example of where you can pull things back and start again. And perhaps, like the earlier speaker said, if you didn't plant the tree 20 years ago, at least plant the tree today. The takeaway that I took, I had never thought, I was aware in the Brexit negotiations that all of Europe stood behind the Good Friday Agreement. I had never seen it from the perspective that you gave, which to me was saying, have a look at how trusted that agreement is. The trust that's been built was even stronger than Brexit.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'd like to offer that as the takeaway message. And with respect to some of the things I was saying earlier today, I think that obviously speaks to the strength of the agreement and how people bought into it, and people were really that prepared to stand by it, and even stakeholders beyond Ireland, i.e. the rest of the European Union. Now, something that I didn't mention in our talk, but something that's very much part of the method that we were describing today, is we try to keep in mind the default option. So whenever you're making a decision, it's a mistake to think that if you don't decide, nothing happens. Yeah? What's the default option? And I think you put in very stark language and statistics what the default option was, and perhaps that was a very strong motivator for people to really make sure they had a solid agreement at the end. So thank you for that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Johannes. John, do you have any reflections on what Richard and Johannes have just said?
Yeah, I think I'm taking a very small view or in a very small segment, but I think there's lessons in all of this, and although I don't understand some of the science of what Sarah talks about from time to time, I do understand the principles, and I do understand the strategy. And I think there's parallels that we can take out of trust learnings from other walks of life, and I guess there's others, okay, that you could equally talk about as well. Because if we want to have, here's me borrowing some of Sarah's vocabulary here now. If we want to have just transitions, if we want to have adult ways of moving from one to something else. Okay, then that requires people having a leap of faith and having a trust in some sort. And what are the things that we need to do to dig deep to make that trust it's resilient to deal with all the knocks that are inevitably going to come. Okay, because there's inevitably going to be really tough knocks that are coming at it. And how do you build agreements? How do you build frameworks? How do you build just transitions that endure the knocks? You do that because you get people together who fundamentally trash it out, argue their point, but then come to a mutual trust, a mutual respect, and then they stick with it.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much for that, John. Now, Ludovine, I know that we've been messaging behind the scenes. Do you have any words of wisdom to leave us with before I wrap up for the day?
No, I wanted to thank John also for making that distinction of the initial leap of faith, which faith by definition requires no proof, which is not the same thing as the enduring trust you build. And that's a lot of the hard work. And this does connect to a lot of the issues we're talking about, because at the moment, the lack of trust between elements of the value chain, but also between blocks and countries, is a huge part of the difficulty. One thing that I did find striking is I'm a big fan of the first follower theory of management or leadership. And what I find interesting is that you had one person needing to take a leap of faith, but then a second person being Bill Clinton, taking a leap of faith on that person. So that for me, again, comes back to the complexity of value chains, where very often we don't know who's taking a leap of faith where. So all of the transparency conversations that we've had, they're not just about ticking a box or creating control. They're about enabling that situation when you see a leap of faith as an actor in the value chain that you think has value, to allow you to become the first follower.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's leadership across very complex and difficult and opaque situations. So thanks. That was a great lesson.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that, Ludovine. And I think just building on that and what you were saying there about the leaps of faith and allowing people to be the fast or first followers, etc. I guess what's going on perhaps in the world of raw materials at the moment is there's so much change, and there are lots of people saying, well, which leaps of faith should I be making? Which direction should I be jumping at the moment? Because I'm willing to come on this journey. I'm willing to trust you. I just don't know what the right answer is at the moment, because it's a very complex system that we're working in at the moment. So fantastic. Firstly, thank you so much to all of our fabulous speakers from this afternoon. Absolutely brilliant session. Thank you so much. Just wrapped up, I think, John, with your Irish music there. So thank you very much for that. Truly brilliant. So just to very quickly recap, we started off this afternoon session with Robin getting us to think, okay, how do you actually do this thing called reflective listening, i.e. properly listening to somebody and being curious in what they're saying? That then flowed through the rest of this afternoon, where Priscilla gave us insight to some of the great work that's going on in the world of tailings dams and some fantastic opportunities that sit within that space, but also as well building on the need to create trust between those people who are operating and managing those tailings facilities and those who are living round about them, for example. Then across into Johannes and Volker, looking at again, so building basically on the listening side of things and saying, okay, how do we actually build this trust between different parties? That was then built on by Adrian even more. So really looking at, okay, who am I with regards to who am I and myself, through all the way to trust in the market as a whole. Then Richard gave us fabulous insight and I think a fantastic case study in terms of how to really respect a community and actually work with them when you're undertaking a wide variety of different types of research. Also as well, we then heard from Leanne, who'd stayed up so late. She did actually request that speaking slot, just to make that clear to everybody, because some people do work really well in the middle of the night. So Leanne gave us insight to really one of the world's leading tools in terms of blockchain and transparency. And then, of course, finally over to Ireland and to John and the fabulous case study there of the trust that was built and maintained, or resilient trust with regards to the Good Friday Agreement.